Hi, everyone. I am back. It is closing argument time here at the West trial, and I'm so excited. Before I begin, I wanted to just thank Opal. She is the one who created this beautiful picture behind me, and I actually met her on in the comments at my last video. So thank you very much, Opal. You did a beautiful job of this. I'm sure that their biological parents would appreciate that. It's a really good job. All right. Right now they're on lunch. I've been taking notes at what happened with the prosecution. I think he's killing it, you guys. I think he is doing a fabulous job. So let me read over my notes here. And I might be a little bit all over the place, but just bear with me because there were some things I wrote down that I felt were more important than other things. So this is Eric Smith, prosecutor Eric Smith, giving his closing arguments. And in there, he said something about he said, okay, now we have three agencies here. We have the California City Police Department, the FBI, the Bakersfield Police Department. And ultimately, all these guys got involved because as the investigation went on, they realized that the foundation of what they were following up on and where they were being led, it was coming from it was coming from two liars, is how he said it. Trezell and Jacqueline West. Everything they've been doing up to that point had been what it relied upon untruthfulness, things that can be proven to now not be true. They're trying to figure out what's real and what's not real, talking about the investigators, what's true, what's not true. And as they're going through the investigation, all the things that Trezell and Jacqueline are telling them, there's no signs that any of it's correct. They're starting to hear things that aren't making sense. He says the officers noted that the demeanor of Jacqueline, especially, was off based upon the situation. They noted the gate that was supposed to be open, it was closed. And when they asked them who closed it, you had Jacqueline saying that Trezell did it. Then Trezell said that Jacqueline did it. The officers, when they first pulled up on scene, noted that the gate was closed immediately, that it wasn't still open. They thought that was weird. Um, just playing off as upon their first interview with police, the inconsistent statements that they were making. They would say one thing and then another person would say another. Things started to change as they would bring things up when they were questioning them, kind of calling them out on their inconsistencies. So the story would twist a little bit and change a little bit, and then they'd leave, and then they'd come back for different interviews, and then they had new stories. And he said that's what's going on here with Trezell. And then they played a call. They were playing several recordings. They played a bunch of stuff that they've already played before. Some of the 911 call again. They showed the video of the gate opening and closing and how difficult it was for the officers to open and close it. So how do we expect that those a 3 and 4-year-old could open and close it? He said that Jacqueline was giving the wrong timeline of things. She said things happened around 5:30. Trezell said something different. I'm trying to see here, 5:38. And when the officers drove up on the scene, what they're hearing, what they're seeing, the initial investigation, just going through the initial investigation, he said alarm bells were going on, and it's based on untruthful statements from Jacqueline and Trezell. He said he brought up the neighbors again, and he starts talking a little bit about the different screenshots that we have from the different webcams around the neighborhood, ring doorbells and cameras outside of homes and whatnot. So he said, obviously, it's off in the distance, but ultimately, I think was it Alvarez? I forget the guy's name. Hernandez? I forget the guy's name that lived across the street. Anyway, he said that area you can see outside of his home, it covers that whole area. And he said, we did not see any children walking. He never saw children outside. The video they saw Trezell get in the van. They never see anybody walking up to the house, any strangers to take the children. All you see is Trezell in the backyard at one point, and then him coming out of the gate, then going back in the gate. And he said that was when the piece where they were saying that he actually thought that the kids had been missing. They said ultimately, if this is when the children were there, actually had been there, that's when they would have walked away. So they're saying at 5:17, when they were watching the video, if the children had left, that's the only time frame they could have left, because again, you've got video surrounding this home that's picking this stuff up. Approximately 30 seconds from that, that's when Trezell goes back inside the house, which we think that's when he told Jacqueline supposedly the kids are missing. Then he comes back out. He goes and gets in his van. He drives around. He said that they were telling everybody they were frantic. He returns back. So okay, so this is 13 minutes later when they're saying that. That's when he gets into his vehicle 13 minutes later, and he says we were frantic. He returns to the house at 5:36. So I think, what did we say? He was like 5 minutes later was when he basically drove around for 5 minutes. That was it. And so prosecution says, again, I'll leave it up to you guys to review these videos again and watch these over to see what you believe. But just remember, keep in mind, as you'll see, there's no children coming and going. There's no adult visible approaching the home. All you see is Trezell. I mean, I have to say, before going to this closing statements, guys, I was worried, because the way that she was calling out, hang on, I gotta open my Diet Coke. The way she was calling out the police officers and making them sound like they had just botched the investigation. You know, we're listening just like the jury's listening. And if we're feeling a little bit unsure of things, I'm sure the jury is too. And I apologize if I'm talking fast, but I'm trying to get this done so that we can listen to this while they're on lunch, because when they come back, that's when the defense is going to start their closings. So this could be a whole day thing, because you remember, we have both Trezell and Jacqueline's attorneys who have to give their closings. Of course, we know pretty much that the other, what's her name, the Tora Stallings, she's going to talk a day and a half, and then the other guy's going to speak for 15 minutes. But that's beside the point. Okay, so then the prosecutor starts discussing the fact that this isn't a stabbing. This isn't a case where somebody was shot. There's no crime scene where there's a bunch of blood everywhere. He said, "We're not going to get that." First of all, that's not how the children were unalived. They were unalived by choking, either off of their airwaves, or blunt force trauma, or by drowning. He said, that's what we believe. That's what the investigators believe. So all of this talk about the DNA in these different places and biological fluids that they did not swab, they did not test the car seat, they did not do this. He said it's irrelevant. That he's talking about how when they were going through the investigation and they were looking through for the DNA, he said as they're going through the investigation, they're comparing things that they're expecting to see, things that they should have seen, things that are there at one point and then they're no longer there. And he said one of the things that were jumping out to him was like simple things like the high chairs. Why weren't the high chairs there? Why weren't there a lot of photos of the kids there? I don't know why it's jumping around, but they played that recording of the gate again. He discusses the fact that, the officers had to open the gate. Maybe I jumped too soon when I talked about that earlier. Maybe that's where I was getting that from. Let's see. If you were to believe Trezell, there's no way they opened that gate, because he says there's no grooves. They didn't push it outward. You would have to pull it inward, I believe. If you were to push the gate out, or look at the deep groove, then you would have to see that the gate, either way, was difficult to open and close. So there's no way a 3 and a 4-year-old did that. Then he goes back to conflicting statements of who closed the gate again. He said Trezell's over here saying, I didn't close the gate. Jacqueline's over here saying, I didn't close the gate. Yet none of the stories are lining up at all. And those consistencies all over the place, ultimately, that's when they're talking to the lieutenant. And then all of a sudden, now this is their second, they're coming back into a second interview, right? So they'd left and they've come back. And now the story is that Jacqueline saying, Trezell said, oh, I did close the gate. I did close the gate. So they're flipping back and forth. And then they talked about how they were flipping back and forth about her being in the living room, and she said she wasn't in the living room, and he said something about, "You were wrapping presents in the living room." And at one point, she gives her information about searching in the backyard, and nothing that they say corroborates with each other. And he says, "Was she in the living room or was she not in the living room?" And then he tells the jury, "Go through the video. Look at the video." She's saying they're walking around looking for the kids. You see the right side of the house, you see the back behind the shed, and then Trezell's like, "And then I went around the shed and into the chair, into the something in the back." He said, "In these videos, you can see a dog at one point. You can see the officer in the later videos. Why couldn't you see it, somebody other than Trezell? Why couldn't you see children?" And then Jacqueline starts talking about how she went all the way down the street looking for the kids, and they played the video of them trying to kind of pin her down on that. And she said, "Well, yeah, there were like two little dogs down there. There was two puppies, and so we were going to walk down to the end of." Let's see how she says it. "I walked down the street all the way to the end because there were two puppies." And she kind of thought the kids would want to go down there. Maybe that's what drugged them down there, seeing the puppies. But in the footage that they've got, she didn't walk down the street. So when they called her out on it, she says, "Well, it was dark." I mean, she said a lot more than that, y'all, but I'm kind of pinning it down a little bit. Okay. Then they talk about after the adoption, she was talking about, oh, the biological family and how they would knock on the door and she wouldn't answer it. And they're talking about how Jacqueline and Trezell are talking to the kids and telling them that they don't have to answer the questions. And at one point, let's see, is this the part? Okay, this is the part where they're saying that they were trying to get the heat off of them, so they start bringing in their questioning, they start bringing in the biological family thing, talking about Aunt Kiki, which contradicted what he had said before. And then they talk about the lady behind the house and how she could see through that fence. And they brought up the fact that the children were being noisy because Trezell had said in one of his interviews that the kids were really noisy when they were outside playing. And she said she never heard any kids playing. If they were there, they would have made a lot of noise. Then they discussed the guy that lived across the street. Remember him? He was the guy that came over to borrow a tool or something. And when they opened the front door, he said he saw 3 to 4 kids, wandering around or whatever. There was noise in the back, but he wasn't sure how many there was. Then he brought up Perla Martinez, Jacqueline's sister, and how they would do video calls. And sometimes the camera would move around and she could see who was who, specifically for Aiden's birthday. They only saw Aiden, and she didn't really know how, she couldn't really, call out any of the kids or whatever. She had never met the kids in person because she had already moved after they were adopted. And they did talk about the blocks that the kids were playing with and how, them having toys and whatnot. These blocks that they're playing with, Jacqueline and Trezell didn't buy those blocks. Perla Martinez brought those toys for those children. Then they talk about how Maria Martinez, she actually lived right next door in the apartment complex. If she was, a proud grandmother, she'd be showing pictures of these kids to multiple people, but she did not. She didn't even know that Trezell and Jacqueline had moved to Cal City until after they were moved. But yet she was supposed to have the children, the grandchildren, according to what Wanda's testimony was and what the children's testimony was. Orrin and Orson were staying at Maria Martinez's house while they were moving. But they talk about how indifferent Maria Martinez was too. I swear, I think that apple doesn't fall far from the tree, y'all. Jacqueline, she's weird. She's just weird. Then they discuss Wanda and Philip and Josiah West, and how, after COVID hit, how it was so convenient because then they didn't see them a lot. That was the mistake that Trezell and Jacqueline made. in their investigation plans. They thought that law enforcement had to ask permission of them to interview their children, but they didn't have to ask permission. Because in one of the interviews, Trezell, I guess, had asked, well, you know, you're interviewing my kids without my permission? And the prosecutor says he thought they needed permission. They did not. And he just starts discussing the children's interview. And he said, think about it. There is some inconsistency, but for the most part, what is consistent is that who was in the van when they drove on December 19th to go to Wanda's house. They were all consistent there that Orrin and Orson were not in the van. Who was in the apartment? They were all consistent there that Orrin and Orson were there. Who was living in the Cal City home? All of them said Orrin and Orson were not there. I think maybe one of them had said that Orson was there for a short time. I really can't wait till you guys get to hear that part of him saying that, because I felt like, okay, he did clear that up, because that part had because it was kind of all over the place on different days and whatnot. It was kind of confusing about what child said what when they said it. Was it consistent with what the other child said? So putting it all together like that, he really did. He it sounded good. I just can't remember exactly what it was. They go over Sonia's questioning of the children, and they played a lot of that. And listening to that child answer those questions really does clarify a lot. I think the kid wasn't dismissive, I guess. You know how some kids are just kind of, when you talk to them, they're just like, I don't know, they don't really care. This child was honing in. He was listening, and he was answering questions, and he was answering. You could just tell these were his opinions. They weren't fed to him. They say, who lived with you at the apartment? He immediately says Orrin and Orson. And he mentions Devin and Adrian and Damien. It's all consistent. And then they say, who lives with you at the California City home? He names Damien and Devin, Aiden and Adrian. They never name Orrin and Orson there. So he's really breaking down the interview with the child, because I guess this is our biggest piece, really, if you think about it. Orson went to grandma's, he said, after we moved. He said, yeah, after we moved, and then Orrin went before Orson did. So the fact that Orrin went missing before Orson is very consistent in the children's stories. They're telling one grandparent, they're with another, so that the grandparents don't start putting things together. And he says, ultimately, on December 28th of 2020, Adrian speaks with, I think that's Sonia, and he provides the information that Orrin had choked in his sleep. And at the time, they were living next door to Grandma at the Casa Loma apartments. And that's where that happened. Then they took a break. He says what's interesting about the description of what was going on that night when Orrin was choking was that the parents didn't leave. They didn't take him to the hospital. They didn't call 911. They didn't take care of him. She asked him, so is that the reason why Orson went to Grandma Mary's? And he said that was consistent with what happened in the order that it happened. Later on, at some point, when Wanda is coming out to the house the night before, he hears a noise in the hallway the day before. I think they were talking about that was the thud. Since that day, since that noise, Orson is never seen again. So go through some of what he said. Orson was out in California City for about 4 days. Now we're moving. They got you got the pest control guy, but ultimately during the week they were back and forth from California City and moving. And he says what that child was saying was consistent with what Wanda West had said. the grandmother, Trezell's mom. All of what she was saying about the cell phone is consistent with what the child is saying all the way back to December 28th. He starts talking about cell phone records. The child was talking about waking up in the morning and seeing vomit coming from Oren's mouth. They got to be talking about Oren's and how he was a weird color. And then about Orson, you hear a thud in the night from the hallway, and the day before Orson was there, and the next day he was gone. And then he talks about how the defense is trying to discredit a 12-year-old child just because he's younger. But then he brings up how Jacqueline said the boys needed to get an attorney because she doesn't want them twisting whatever they're saying. Anything they can do to keep the kids from talking to law enforcement, that's what they were doing. She says, I don't want you to tell anybody. I don't want nobody to tell you what to say. Nothing like that. You don't have to. You don't have to talk to nobody. I know you've been asking a lot of questions, but you don't have to answer them if you don't want to. Remember, they interviewed these children separately. So, which, I mean, I know you guys know that, but like, how come their stories are so consistent? The prosecution's kind of bringing that up. They talk a lot about the children and what the children said and how the children were broken apart with the family, and they felt like they were using the fact that they were going to get taken away is a reason for them not to talk to the police and whatnot, because they had access to talk to these children during the investigation. And he talked about how Wanda wouldn't want to get up there and talk against what her son, you know, she wouldn't want to get up there and say something that's going to put her son in jail, obviously, and keep them from getting the kids back. So there has to be excuses said. So he's kind of saying that, if you listen to her testimony, you maybe read through her testimony again, there were a lot of excuses thrown around. And he brings up again the night that they went to the credit union, and I think they went by McDonald's too. And, they make 4 stops. And when they first got out of the van, you saw the four other children get out of the van. Supposedly, Oren and Orson are sleeping all the way in the back. She brings up the excuse that there was music playing. Oh, and then he talks about how in one video, is this a video? They went to the Dollar General and then they went to the gas station. He says, this is like a 3-hour time span. And you got these kids in the back and they never need to get out and use the bathroom or have their diapers changed or they never need to be checked on. He said, all of that doesn't make sense. And then he says something about more footage. And then now you're talking 5 hours and 9 minutes. So they start talking about text messages. At one point, at Christmas time, remember she had bought the children clothing. He brought that up. He said she was begging for pictures of the kids. They didn't get them. Why didn't they take the pictures? Why can't they have just sent pictures to their grandmother? Most proud parents would have done that. And he said at one point, Trezell drops off Jacqueline at her mother's. He drops off the 4 boys at Wanda's. And then you see him travel west by himself. And then you have Jacqueline over here eating tacos with her mom. He said, where's Oren and Orson? He said they're on completely different parts of town. Now, why is that important? Because as Jacqueline said, they were together the whole day, but then she does not tell the truth during this investigation. They play another recording, which hopefully we'll get soon. Let's see. Together. So he says, I'm going to go through this. They were not together. What she said, this isn't true. This is Maria Martinez during her interview. So I guess now he's saying that in Maria Martinez's interview, she's now not telling the truth. I feel like Maria Martinez is sketchy. I've said that from the beginning. Then he says, Maria Martinez, what she said was Trezell was by himself. The kids were dropped off at Wanda's West home. When they asked, did you see the kids? She said no. He said, then you've got the phone calls going back between Trezell and Jacqueline, showing that they weren't together during this time period. So I guess at some point they were telling Wanda West's family that they were together. He does point out that there was some stuff that Jacqueline said that was completely inconsistent with what Maria Martinez was saying. He's breaking down the videos, a lot of what Jacqueline and Trezell were doing. I don't know. Was he trying to say that this was when they got rid of the baby's remains? I don't know. No, they drive to California City in the van, and then they go to Bakersfield to that new home. He said at some point in that evening, Jacqueline and Trezell come back to Cal City to get the van, and he said Wanda said right then and there that when she came back in that night while she was staying with them, they came in and then they were in the kitchen for a little bit and then they went to bed. What they're saying about Trezell after, remember when he dropped off the van or when he went, well, I said that when Wanda drove Trezell to pick up his van that had been parked at the old apartment complex, at that point, he should have picked up the children, which were supposedly at Maria Martinez's house right there, the next building over, or I don't know, the conflicting stories. I think she was right there in the same. I mean, we know she's in the same complex, but he didn't. He didn't even go stop in and check on him. He gets in the van. He follows Wanda West out to the highway. And he just keeps talking about these different periods of time when they're seeing all these different people. And he's pointing out, again, no Orson, no Oren. And then he starts talking about how physically abusive they were. He talks about the belts and how the one child had testified that they had blood on them from the metal rings in the belts, and they play that video again. He says these are wounds. Are these wounds that could lead to death? Maybe that's why they didn't report it, because they caused the death. They let him die either by what they did or didn't do. He said their whole life is based upon the money. He said that their adopted money. And I loved this part. He goes, they've been warehousing children. That's what they've done. They're warehousing these children to get paid. He said they knew, let's see. He said they knew that the biological family would have figured things out if they just stayed where they were because they knew where they lived. Because remember, she said that they would come knock on the door and she wouldn't answer. So they knew they had to get out of there. They had to move. And they said they used COVID as a shield with the West family because Wanda West was very active with the boys before all this happened, with all the children. He said now they've got 3 months to plan to put all of this into action. They got to get rid of their phones. They got to get new phones. All these things that they've done in this time period add up now. They've gotten rid of the apartment. Then he brings up how they can go through their financial records. The jury's going to have access to look at their financial records to see that all the income that they had was coming strictly from adoptions and every now and then money they'd get from Wanda West. He says, based on the evidence in the case, I ask you to, what does he say? Oh, he talks about that horrible video where they got up and they had to tell them, they had to face the cameras and say what happened. Oh, I can't figure out what I wrote down here. What did they do based on the evidence in this case? I ask you to something yourself. And then that was it from the prosecution. They went to lunch. They're letting the defense set up, wondering what they're going to be doing there. They're coming back at 1:30 their time. And hopefully I'll be able to get this uploaded so you guys can listen to it before then. That was chicken scratch. That was with a little help of Microsoft. So stay tuned, guys. A lot more to come before the end of the day. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.